All right. Once again, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Hokyoji Sunday Dharma Talk. This morning we have with us Ryushin Jan Freier.
Can we skip my introduction?
Okay, sure.
So I've been around for a while. I made some mistakes. I did some good things. Here I am, right? So the last time I spoke, I started out by saying, getting this quote from Sounds True Online, which I made fun of because they pull people in with these kind of things. How can you create a life of exceptional fulfillment, purpose, and joy? And so at that time, I said, you probably are not in the right place if you wanted that. But this week, how can you create a life of exceptional fulfillment, purpose, and joy? We're going to go down that road. So I took a 6-week online free course from Harvard on managing happiness, taught by Arthur Brooke. And the reason I wanted to take this class was, well, like everyone else, I'm kind of interested in being happy, but also I was kind of worried in a way that there's a kind of a self-sabotage happening in Buddhism about you shouldn't be sad, you should be happy. So I'm worried about that if that's actually coming from academia, and I'm happy to report that it's not. That's just completely Buddhist self-sabotage, misinterpreting a kind of a wish fulfillment. So this 6-week course is conducted by Arthur Brooks, who's a professor at Harvard, and he's a proponent of positive psychology, as uncovered by Martin Seligman from the University of Pennsylvania. The University of Pennsylvania is the hotbed of positive psychology. So the course, if anybody's interested, there's quizzes, there's little videos, there's this or that. Basically, it's social science. And for some reason, a lot of social science comes out of business schools. you can figure that out for yourself, what's going on there. But social scientists, there's a lot of parallels with Buddhism, including a lot of lists. There's a lot of lists, but the difference is social scientists have data. They have numbers, they have percentages, they have surveys, they have scores. So you end up during the course of the class taking a lot of surveys and scores. And it's social science is very difficult because it's all you're self-reporting, and a lot depends on how honest you are with yourself, how honest you can possibly be with yourself, how biased the questions are. Part of a class I took in college was on social research, double blind Solomon studies or whatever, and it's very, very difficult to not have bias. So it's pretty obvious as you go through the course what the bias of Arthur Brooks is. But fortunately for me, I have the same bias. And fortunately for Buddhists, there's also a lot of parallels with that. So I also would say that the course was developed at the beginning of the pandemic. So Arthur Brooks kind of goes out of his way to keep people buoyed up and not isolated. And he ends up, it's a survey course. So he ends up interviewing a lot of people in the positive psychology, social science world. And a lot of the interviews, I came away not liking Arthur Brooks too much because he's a little too certain for me. But some of the people he interviews, I really, really liked. So to get to the start of positive psychology, we have to go to Martin Seligman. So Martin Seligman started out training dogs to be helpless, training helplessness. So this is basically shocking a dog, and in one set of cages with a little barrier, there's and they put him in a harness, they shock a dog, and the dogs in one set of cages can hit a lever, and they figure out that that lever will stop the shock. In the other cage, there's at the same time, there's dogs that don't have a lever, and they're just nothing they can do will prevent the shock. Then later, they take the harnesses off, and the dogs that learn to hit a lever jump over this little barrier into the other side of the cage, and there's no shock on that side. The dogs that have been trained in helplessness just lay there on the shocking pad and whimper, which is just gross. That's just terrible. And the researchers actually have to lift them up and carry them over the barrier at least twice before they learn to go over the barrier to get off the shock. So at least they did that. So this is the basis of Martin Seligman's research. It's trained helplessness. So he begins to think that along the lines of pessimism breeds passivity. That's a big thing. Pessimism breeds passivity. And I think we may have all heard of someone who's so depressed that they don't get out of bed. This is pessimism breeds passivity. Martin Seligman also believes a lot that we spend a lot of our time thinking about the future. So whether we're basically optimistic or pessimistic has a lot to do with our frame of mind and how we go about things. So it's also interesting that no matter how he tried, a third of the population of the dogs could not be trained in helplessness. They would get up and go to the other side, even though he had trained them to be helpless. So from this, Martin Seligman goes into being a clinical psychologist. And he admits that he wasn't a very good clinical psychologist. But he did manage to get people out of their clinical anxiety, clinical anger management issues, clinical depression. And he thought that when he got people out of their clinical depression, anger, anxiety, that he would have helped generate happy people. And to his shock, he did not generate happy people. He had on his hands at that time what he called empty people, which is not a very nice term and certainly runs against our Buddhist thinking about emptiness. And it strikes me that Martin Seligman didn't have a very good idea of what identity is, because having gone through grief and loss, I mean, if your whole world was a touchstone of anxiety and your anxiety is removed, you're at a loss. You are kind of, in a way, empty. So you have to start over. You have to build again. So what this led to positive psychology, in that Martin Seligman realized that getting rid of the sources of unhappiness do not create happiness. So when he became president of some national psychology organization, he challenged people to work on positive psychology, to not just have the skills that psychology was always working on, of trying to get rid of people of the negative aspects, but to nurture positive aspects towards happiness, towards more positive feelings. So when he did this, neuroscientists, this was about this, and I gotta say, he doesn't mention this, but this was in the 60s, and everybody wanted to be happy in the 60s. So it's kind of a cultural thing, right? Let's look at happiness instead of just being, working off getting unhappiness. And when he did this, then neuroscientists discovered who knew that happiness and unhappiness are two different centers of the brain, two different areas of the brain. The area of the brain that works on happiness is a separate center from the area that dwells on unhappiness. So these are two different areas of the brain, and it's two different sets of skills. So then people began to think about what the skill set is to become happy. So there's also research that at different times in life, happiness, whatever nebulous, crazy idea that is, means different things at different times, and it changes like every 5 to 10 years. But the idea of unhappiness is like the getting rid of the sources of unhappiness is kind of a theoretical basis for understanding midlife crisis. Is if you've by the time midlife, you've gotten, if you're successful, you've gotten rid of most of the problems that were causing unhappiness. Things like shelter, food, transportation, heating, healthcare, and then there's nothing. Why am I not happy? I've succeeded in getting rid of all these things, and so people get confused at that point. So there's also this idea of if we don't learn anything from this talk, it's that this idea that there's unhappiness and happiness are two separate centers. So it's like unhappiness. The example I could think of is if you're in a building and you're doing work or sitting somewhere for a class or something, and an alarm goes off, and someone comes on the PA and says, "This is a malfunction. Don't worry, we're working on this." And there's this awful noise, and it's a source of unhappiness. It's a source of annoyance. And when that alarm goes away, you don't necessarily feel happy. You just feel like the unhappiness has been removed. So the more I thought about this, it's a little trickier than I think they're making it out to be, because in my own life, when sources of unhappiness have been removed, like when a very difficult person has been fired from where I was working, or I managed to pull myself for one reason or another out of depression, there was a certain giddiness, a certain unhinged quality of certain freedom. But it's like, it is kind of that same, it's the other side of the coin of that empty thing. Is that if that depression was a touchstone, if that difficult person was a touchstone at work and they're removed, you are kind of unhinged. You don't know quite what to do with yourself in some ways. So Martin Seligman just basically kept working on this. Pessimism breeds passivity, and optimism engenders action. So this is the theme that runs through this whole course, at least the theme that I picked up on this whole course, because I looked through my notes and I only took notes on the things that interested me, and this was the thing that interested me. So you're getting my version of what this 6 weeks course is in a half hour, 40 minutes, whatever. So pessimism breeds passivity, optimism breeds action. There's this dichotomy between helplessness, non-action, and action, which is described as agency. Agency isn't a word that came into my vocabulary much at all, except for maybe the last 2 or 3 years, and now I'm seeing it everywhere. So there's a difference between this helplessness and agency. So there's a few pillars. This is the first list we're going to get. A few pillars of positive psychology. And it's a mnemonic device called PERMA. So P stands for positive emotions. These would be things like gratitude, generosity, kindness, compassion. These should sound pretty familiar. Brahma Viharas and such, and pretty familiar to Buddhist practice. Positive emotions, gratitude, generosity, kindness, compassion. And in the middle of this course, I also took a course from Upaya on love and death from Frank Ostaseski and Roshi Joan Halifax. And they're not afraid to throw the word love around quite a bit. So the course was on love and death. So that would also be one of these positive emotions. E is engagement. Basically, if you're interested in something, if you're engaged in something, there's positive things going on. This is really something that Katagiri Roshi talked about quite a bit, about wholeheartedness. I think this is the same area of engagement, of full engagement. If you're fully engaged, that's a very positive thing. They say happy, but happy is a transient kind of thing. Because social scientists are scientists, a lot of them kind of balked at this idea of happiness and went more towards well-being, this kind of sustainable well-being. And some of them even go so far as to go to longevity, how long you live and how well you live without serious health issues. So, but the more engagement you have in your life, the more well-being you have in your life. And R for PERMA is relationships. This is working for the benefit of others. This is working with others. This is having a relationship with others. This is not being isolated like the pandemic was causing people to be isolated, but this was interacting with people and working, having purpose in your life, working for others, for the benefit of others. It's very beneficial to well-being to work for the benefit of others. I think it shows up in just about every religion that I know of. And a lot of this is just plain common sense put into social scientists. And so a lot of social science is criticized because it's so nebulous and it's kind of common sense. So we've hit positive emotion, engagement, relationship. M is meaning. Things have to have meaning. Things have to have purpose. There has to be a sense of purpose and a greater sense, a wider view of things, that things have meaning, that things fit together, that what you're doing fits into a larger perspective. And then A has to do with agency, but in the PERMA list, it has to do with accomplishment. And this is where it gets interesting for Buddhists, accomplishment, because we have the 4 vows. Beings are numberless, I vow to save them. Delusions are inexhaustible, I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless, I vow to enter them. Buddha's way is unsurpassable, I vow to realize it. I can't check any of those boxes. I don't have those accomplishments. What am I going to do? So, do I drop off into pessimism? Do I look at the future and say, oh, no, because we're trained, even the sitting in the Zendo is, it's training us in a way to what one of the disciples of positive psychology, the most dangerous one in my opinion, Angela Duckworth, she talks about persistence and passion for long-term goals. And at first, she sounded just crazy to me, but she's trying to instill this in youth. And it's what my English teacher in high school 11th grade called stick-to-itiveness. Anybody ever heard the word stick-to-itiveness? It's maybe a Western Pennsylvania term. But basically, the 4 vows were asked to stick to it. In the Zendo, we're asked to stick to it. You sit till the bell rings. We're trained in stick-to-itiveness. And I remember one of the things that Katagiri Roshi said was, it's important to engage in the impossible. So where is our persistence and passion tested? It's tested engagement in the impossible. So on the one side, there's pessimism, passivity, helplessness. There's Rolling Stones, 19th nervous breakdown. It goes, nothing I do don't seem to work. It only seems to make matters worse. I think we've all been there at some point or another. And it leads to passivity. It leads to not engaging. And on the other side, there's optimism and agency. And agency, as they define it in the positive psychology world, is efficacy, optimism, and imagination. Efficacy means you're efficient at what you do. Something you do actually does something. I recall times when I was trying to solve bugs in my software world, and I was basically flailing. I was basically floundering. I was basically, what I learned, what I was doing was spending time until I could figure out something. So I would code something up to test something that I knew wasn't going to do anything, but it was something to do. It was a sense of agency. It wasn't very efficient. It wasn't dealing with efficacy, but a lot of times I would be coding something up and I would almost go to compile it and run it, and I would have the better idea, and I would scrap what I was doing and try something else. So there is this idea of agency. This idea of agency is really key, I think, in working with helplessness. So the last chapter, there's 6 chapters, and every chapter is supposed to take a week. You get a week to fulfill it. There's had a lot to do with this fellow named Bruce Feiland, and he wrote a book called Life is in the Transitions, Mastering Change at Any Age. And we're going to have a lot of statistics coming at us now. So, but this is really pretty fascinating. Mr. Feiland, is it Feiler, collected tons of data in interviews in all 50 states. And this is what social scientists do. They collect tons of data. They interview hundreds and hundreds of people, and then they have their computers work this out for them. So he's interested in these transitions. So his research indicated that every 12 to 18 months, we experience some level of transition. And they define this as a liminal state. The liminal state is based on the word threshold. So you're on a threshold. You're not quite there, and you're no longer quite where you were. You're going through a transition. So I'm not sure exactly how they define all these transitions, but they also say that 47% are voluntary. And I'm not sure if that means they're self-initiated or you're just compliant with external transition put upon you. But 47% are you agree to that transition. 3 to 5 times in a lifetime, these transitions can be a massive change. And these are the ones that I can relate to, because I seem to have gone through more than 3 to 5 massive changes. Maybe I'm just lucky that way. So his research indicates that 90% of outcomes are deemed positive by the people who go through these transitions. 90% deemed positive. And we're going through a lot of transitions. So this is like, I don't want to mention impermanence, but this is impermanence. Every 12 to 18 months, we're going through a transition and it surprises us. It shouldn't be a surprise. So 90% of the outcomes are deemed positive. But the interesting thing is, in the middle of the transition, there is fear, sadness, and shame. In the middle of the transition, fear, sadness, and shame. And it took me a while to figure out why there's shame. And I think it's because we think we should be able to handle this. Because in America, we're this individualism. I have control. Well, you don't have control. So there's this shame of, I'm not able to handle this. But you do. 90% are deemed successful transitions. So this is the area that Arthur Brooks, I think, is most interested in. And so he calls this situation, when we're going through this transition, he calls it bewilderment. I think that's a great term, bewilderment. In Buddhism, we would call this not knowing. We don't know, not knowing. But bewilderment is pretty good because we have no idea. So there's some interesting techniques that I want to bring up pretty quickly. So one of the techniques from Martin Seligman is when you see something, when you see the pessimism coming in, you see the dark clouds coming in, you see the future is dark, you just purposely think of the worst case scenario. You think of this worst case scenario, and then this is called the disputation technique. And then you dispute it with your facts, with your rational mind. He's asking a lot of your rational mind in a difficult situation, but nonetheless, he's also engaging your imagination, and he engages your imagination in the worst possible way. So he engages your imagination to think of the worst possible situation. And then you use your rational mind to think, well, is that really very likely? What's really, do you think that's really going to happen? And it's like, no, that's probably not going to happen. And then you reverse that because it's the disputation, you think of the best possible scenario. You use your imagination to think, how can this possibly come out the best possible way? And then you think, well, is that very likely? No, it's not very likely either. And then somewhere in the middle, you begin to shift things around. And there's also an interesting technique that I think is just brilliant, is that you don't know what to do. You're in this bewilderment stage. You don't know whether to be helpless or exercise agency, but you think, I can do this or I can do that. And the idea is you just direct yourself. I'm going to flip a coin and I'm going to do whatever the coin says. And you agree to this. You agree to this as wholly as you can. And then you flip the coin, and whatever the coin, if it says heads, I'm going to do this. And the heads comes up and says, I'm going to do this. And then you sense what happens in your body. And if your body says, no way is that going to happen, then you've learned something. So this is something outside of yourself. You agree to it outside of yourself, and then you see what happens. It's a pretty interesting idea. So in these bewilderment stages, there's also research about all these. There's 3 stages in the bewilderment stage. There's the long goodbye, the messy middle, and the new beginning. Well, what a surprise. So Arthur Brooks, like I said, is of this bias. He says, difficult times cause us to reorient and bolster the elements that give meaning to our lives. When difficult things come around, we reorient and we look to find meaning in our life. Meeting challenges leads to expansion of neurophysiological processing. This is pretty interesting. Meeting challenges leads to expansion of neurophysiological processing. We're actually more open. We have an increased capacity to hold sensation when we're going through these bewilderment stages. Otherwise, withdrawal makes us less able to feel joy, to engage. We start to shut down. And that's what we want when we want to be helpless. We want to be this dog lying on a shock bed and whimpering. It's just incredibly sad. But it's learned helplessness. You just don't want to go there. You want to force yourself to open. And it's like this woman in one research that says it's just like flipping a switch. People just say, I'm not going to let the risk interfere with my going ahead. So there's stories from Buddhism. Maybe a lot of us are familiar with the bird in the forest fire, where the forest fire sweeps through the forest and there's a river and all the animals go to the other side of the river and they're all watching the forest burn and they're all concerned and talking about the forest burning and what are they going to do. And this little bird starts to take a beak full of water and drop it on the forest fire. And I got into a discussion with Norman Fisher when his book came out about The World Doesn't Have to Be That Way, about imagination. And he said, why didn't I use that story in that book? And I said, I don't think that story is about imagination. I don't think the little bird thought she was going to put out the forest fire, even though agency has to do with efficacy, optimism, imagination. I think the little bird had to do that. That's my take on the story. Agency gets to that level at some point, that it's not a choice. And Frank Ostaseski it's amazing how much some of this language parallels some of the language that Frank Ostaseski used in his workshop. He talked about even letting go, even the idea of acceptance in his thinking still has some ego to it. What really, the word that he really likes is surrender, where you just lay down and do what has to be done. And I think that's what this little bird story is about. And some of the little bird stories, the bird gets rewarded with all these beautiful, colorful feathers, but I think the bird could care less about colorful feathers. The bird just did what had to be done. So I talked to my oldest friend from college, who's a trans woman, and we didn't plan anything like that. And we're talking about this helplessness and agency and happiness. And she tells me that when people go through transition, bewilderment stage for transition in the trans world, this is the same kind of thing. People will want to reward your bravery, reward your courage. And she gets upset when she hears that, because there may be some courage, there may be some bravery. From the outside, it sure looks like it to us. But to the people going through it, it's not bravery, it's not courage. It's just doing what has to be done. And people can lose their friends, they can lose their family, they can lose their job, they can lose just about everything. But she told me that they have this sense of agency, which kind of surprised me because I'm not familiar with the word, but they have this sense of agency that they did something that had to be done, and they rebuild their life on that resource doing what had to be done. So I'm running over, but it was 6 weeks. Come on. So Arthur Brooks, surprisingly, this long period of bewilderment, there's rethinking, reframing, revising, updating our story. You need pain and suffering at times to help you understand what matters most to you. You need pain and suffering at times to help you understand what matters most to you. We shouldn't spend our lives trying to avoid it or neutralize it. So then he talks to these two guys who aren't social scientists, they're engineers. One worked for Electronic Arts, one worked for Apple, and they have a book called Designing Your Life, and they basically are advising this. So Arthur Brooks is pulling these people in as well. He says, be curious. What interests you? What engages you? So Arthur Brooks also says that don't take a job that seems like fun. Take a job that really interests you, that can really pull you in. And their basic thing is try stuff. Have this bias towards action. Try stuff. See what happens. If you fail, reorient, reframe. A lot of Buddhism, almost all the dialogues in the Blue Cliff Record and stuff are one person or another reframing the question. So it's reframe and understand it's a process, and sometimes you must let go. That's amazing that they say this. Sometimes you must let go and reform, replace, reorient, update. And they also suggest pursuing radical collaboration with others because other people have gone through what you're going through, probably. And also there's this connection, this community that can build. So Frank Ostaseski always ends his workshops with the 5 remembrances. So this takes on a whole new meaning when you think about it, helplessness and agency. So I'm going to just go through these. I am of the nature to grow old. I cannot escape old age. I am of the nature to grow ill. I cannot not escape sickness. I am of the nature to die. I cannot escape death. I will be separated from everything and everyone I hold dear. So if it's not exactly explicit, it's implicit that there's a certain helplessness here, but it's not quite helplessness. But there's a certain element of helplessness that you can't help but be sick. You can't help get old. You can't help but to die. You can't help but be separated from everyone you love. But my only true possession is my actions. This is agency, balancing off helplessness. So I don't want to end on that bummer. I want to end on my sign-in at Open Arms where I do kitchen work. So I think this is very interesting to me, but it's only because it's me, and maybe it's quirky. But they have you sign in, you put your name into the computer, and then this computer comes up and says, "Is this you? Is this you?" And it's a very interesting question to a Buddhist, right? Is this you? Who am I? So one place I worked, Cyber Optics, it was a corporation that was really into Halloween, and they had big prizes like iPads and iPhones and big prizes. So a lot of people took this very seriously. So the guy next to me, who's a Tibetan Buddhist community, he came in a big orange and yellow dashiki and a little hat, and he's very tall and lanky, and they go around. We have a kind of a meeting in the cafeteria, and so everybody gets to vote, right? So everybody who's in costume has to stand up and say who you are so you know who to vote for. So they're going around the room and saying, well, who are you? Who are you? So they come to him and say, who are any of us really? I think it's the funniest thing I've ever heard in a corporate setting. It broke me up. It still breaks me up. Who are any of us really? So that's what I think every time I see this thing at Open Arms. It says, is this you? And I'm told, I asked about this, and they said, well, it's to tell if you're this Kathy Peterson or that Kathy Peterson, because there's a lot of Kathy Petersons around. But that doesn't really work. But it's like, I like the question, is this you? Because here I am. I'm standing here. This is me. This is my interest. And then you have the choices: start over or continue. Can you start over, or do you want to continue? I want to continue. And then it mentions the shift. They know the shift that you're signed up for. And they say, are you ready? This is a good question. That's a great question. Are you ready? And again, you have the choice. You can start over or you can continue. So that's my talk. Start over or continue.
Thank you, Ryushin. We'll open it up to questions and comments. Kikan.
Hey, thank you for your talk. It's a lot. I think there's a lot to think about and work with there. I just wanted you to know that stick-to-itiveness is a word. It's in Merriam-Webster. And I'm guessing that it's probably in Merriam-Webster because it was on The Simpsons in the 1990s. And I've noticed that they started incorporating words that they've used on The Simpsons, like embiggen, for example, which I'm pretty sure they just made up. But stick-to-itiveness, that's been out there. The other thing I could get into I could quote the bit from The Simpsons for you because it's kind of funny, but I won't do that. Basically, well, I won't go to that. The thing about the Seligman's experiments with the dogs, I don't want to judge it too much without really getting into the details of the study in a way that I haven't. I don't know, but it kind of makes me angry actually on more than one level. I mean, the basic level is that, the suffering involved, that's like bad enough. But beyond that, I'm not sure it's like really good science even. I mean, what bothers me is they seem to be making an assumption that by sitting there, on the platform, the dogs that are getting the electrical shock, like, aren't doing anything. And in simple terms, I'd ask, is that really true? I mean, the dog might be asking the researcher, would you please stop giving me electrical shock? The dog might be communicating, hoping that would actually help. Meanwhile, the researcher is like, oh yeah, that's not what we're looking for, buddy. You're out of luck. So there's some kind of human assumptions that may be coming into play here about the dog's responses. And that sounds pretty awful to me.
It is awful. I think it undercuts a lot of the good that he's done in the world. And the dogs do whimper. It's like they are communicating. It's like, do something. It's like, maybe I don't know. But this, if they would have done it with rats, we wouldn't have cared quite so much. But yeah, we'd still care, right? It's like this is how science used to work in a lot of ways. So this is kind of what he grew up in. So I don't know. He's tried to compensate for it over the years since then. But I made the mistake of looking up on Wikipedia what trained helplessness was and what the experiments were. And that's what I shared with you. And it is pretty awful. So.
Well, to lighten the mood, I'll just share briefly from The Simpsons. What happens is that Mr. Burns is giving a lecture at the Junior Achievers Club, and they get to the end, and Mr. Burns asks, "Any questions?" And the kids don't, just sit there silently. So Principal Skinner says, "Well, I have a question. Which is more important, hard work or stick-to-itiveness?" And Mr. Burns says, "Any real questions?" Anyway, thank you.
Angela Duckworth works with youth in trying to instill stick-to-itiveness, because the way social science works is that people with stick-to-itiveness, they're more successful than people without stick-to-itiveness. We have to instill this in our youth somehow. But my friend also mentioned sometimes bees get into her house, and there's bees that are there's honeybees and there's bumblebees, and she says the honeybees will just go to a window and slam themselves against the window over and over again. The sky's right there, why can't I get there? He says the bumblebees will come in and they'll make a circuit through the room, and like they sense the air currents, and they'll figure out, oh, there's a window open here, and they leave. So it's like this stick-to-itiveness, it's not always a good thing. You can just beat your head against the wall. And the thing that came to me was like, I was a theater major in college. How many people who wanted to be on the stage ended up on the stage? You can beat your head against a wall. It's not going to happen. You can put 10,000 hours in, you can become proficient, but without a certain level, without a certain look, without certain conditions, things aren't going to happen. So you have to refactor, reorient, find out what really means things to you. Be the bumblebee, not the honeybee.
Kyoku.
Well, you've just affirmed my entire life. I'm so happy. I was sitting here and thinking about my one and only. I was a psychology major, and I only had one laboratory class, and decided I would never be a laboratory person because it involved doing terrible things to mice. Just to show you what experimenting with mice was about. It's like you already knew the answer, but you took a perfectly healthy mouse and essentially tortured it and killed it. So I thought, well, that will never do. Sometimes, however, it's hard to know. I think maybe the 40s are the part where you assess whether you should continue persisting or change gears. Maybe the entire decade's about trying to figure that out. So life really helps us. Thank you so much for sharing this. I wish I'd been there. I wish I'd taken the, 6 weeks.
It's open to everyone. It's free.
And it repeats?
No, it's open. It's like you can start anytime and end anytime. You just have a 6-week period to go.
Oh, cool. Excellent.
Now, if you want a certificate, it'll cost you $300. You have then they give you much more data, and they keep a happiness portfolio for you and all this stuff. And as it is, some of the scores I got were kind of dubious, and I think it was because I hadn't paid the the $300, like I had a 0 empathy score, and I just know that's not true.
Absolutely, absolutely.
But I did find out that I'm not very good at forgiveness, which I was pretty much aware of. So
Well, yeah, I am tend to be a persister myself. That's I figure that's my savings grace, because I get into trouble all the time, or I'm headed off in some direction, or I'm, hurting somebody just by being who I am and interacting with them. It just comes naturally sometimes. So my saving grace, I've always thought, is that I'm really good at persisting, but not so stupid that I won't give up. So I just really want to thank you for sharing this. I'm delighted by it, and I'm sure I'll get to use it going forward. Please persist in bringing us your points of view and your talks.
some of the surveys and scores are interesting in that it's possible to be a mixture of positive and negative. You can have high potential in both at the same time, or you can have an imbalance, or you can have like zip. So it's like, and when everybody, because there's a discussion board, almost everybody who got those scores was kind of shocked and surprised. And it's like, you could just give the people scores at random and they would have to think, am I like that? Well, maybe I am like that.
Sounds like a horoscope.
Very much like a horoscope.
Ryushin-san, am I on?
Yeah.
Okay. That's my question.
Are you on?
Am I on? I'm not going to ask you how being scientifically told that you have 0 empathy affected you on the positive happiness scale. So this is a course in positive happiness, and they delivered to you the message that you have 0 empathy, scientifically determined. I'm not going to go there. But anyway, I am curious if you'd say something about how you said that you now see agency a lot. In other words, what does that mean, or what are some examples of that, would you say?
Okay, well, the 0 score is basic. There was a glitch in the system, I'm pretty sure. And there were other people who were also complaining about it on the discussion board. So but I would say when I was going through the real bewilderment stage with the grief of Sandy dying and being ill, that I was kind of amazed that a lot of the things that they suggested to generate more positive thinking, I just ended up doing intuitively. And that it would, joining community, volunteering, and doing things. So immediately following, well, not immediately, but sooner or later, within a week or two, I began cleaning the house out because Sandy left a lot of stuff in this house, a lot of art supplies, a lot of things that other people could use. And the first thing I did was I got rid of all the medical stuff that was in the house because I didn't want to remember her as being, tied up with medical stuff. So every day I would set something to do. And sometimes I would have to take a break because it was too emotional. And then I would move on. And every day I had one chore. So this I think is like agency. I was doing something. I was moving forward, and doing something with the things that she left to help other people, and keeping myself active, not being a puddle on the floor, though I was a puddle on the floor occasionally, because this idea of acceptance is kind of silly in a way, because some things are so powerful that there's no question of whether you're accepting or not. It's just going to crash across you. But I think that's a good example of the agency. And then, I started cooking at Hokyoji a lot. I started being a member of Compassion Ocean. I went to Goodwill 39 times with a car full of stuff. I went to different art places to donate things. So I think that's a sense of agency to get me through that period.
Thank you. I guess I'd like to follow up with Genpo on that, of you noticing agency like with other people, or how that agency in yourself kind of, like how you noticed it in other people, or how you saw that just kind of in your daily life, like watching others.
Well, I volunteer at the Open Arms Kitchen, so it's not like every day I want to actually go there, but it's normally I feel much better when I leave than I do when I get there, and there's other people, regulars, who are showing up that I see are going. You're going out of your way to make this part of your schedule. So this is like a certain sense of agency. I also see people, homeless people, on the street asking for whatever can help, and people go out of their way to do something. So there's this idea of agency is also this. They talk about it as people project into the future of not wanting to do a certain action because of something that possibly might happen in the future. But what they come down to, the social scientists say, it's not about something that's going to happen in the future. It's about the fear of risk right there. And they talk about when they see people in their, it's not just social scientists, but it's also psychologists. When they see people in their practice who just decide, forget about the risk, I'm doing this. They say it's just like it's flipping a switch. It's just like the risk is out of the question, and they're just going ahead. And it's a beautiful thing when that happens. And I think we can all relate to that. It's something we feel we might need to do, something we might want to do, and it's like, well, I don't know, I don't want the rejection, I don't want the risk, but at some point something can flip, and you just get past that. So Katagiri Roshi talked about some of this stuff more than you might think, and he's talked about terminal station, where you just take a train and you go to the last station. It's not like the terminal station, it's like the last station, and there's no place to go after that. It's like, where are we going to go after this? And it's like, you have to decide, you have to make that move. So he also would talk about people wait till the conditions are right, till the universe all comes together so I can act. He says, you can't do that. You have to reach out your hand, and the universe will reach out its hand. You have to reach out. So it's a very powerful teaching.
All right, that is time for us this morning. Thank you very much, Rushin, for your talk. Next week, we will be hearing from Reverend Shuji Valdine Mintzmeyer. So that's exciting. We have a lot of other things going on at Hokyoji this fall. We have, well, some of you are in session right now. We have a Just Sitting retreat, starts October 17th. There's a Naturally Awake retreat with Mark Anderson November 9th. And Practicing the Way This Very Moment with Reverend Anru Kennedy and Reverend Genjo Sam Conway. That's November 16th. And then for those of you who do like to plan your futures, way out December 2nd is Hokyoji's Rohatsu session will begin. So thank you again, everyone. Let's go ahead and close with the 4 vows. Beings are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. The Buddha way is unsurpassable. I vow to realize it. All right. Thank you, everyone, and we'll hope to see you online again.